Good morning. Welcome to today's digital forum. My name's Don, and I am going to be your host today. Just like to thank Envu for sponsoring today's event, and we will hear from Richard a little bit later on this morning. Just to do some introductions and some housekeeping bits while everyone sort of joins and gets settled. There is a chat function. If you click on the chat function, you'll be able to talk between yourselves. If you do have any technical difficulties, please put it in there, and one of the BPCA team will be sitting in the background and will be able to help you out with anything like that. Commonly, if you do have a technical problem, it's a case of turning it off and then just logging back in again. But any issues, please do put it in there, and we'll hope to try and rectify them. There is a Q&A section. If you want to ask any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. We always leave space for questions at the end of the presentation, so please do ask questions. It's a really great opportunity to get answers to some of those questions that you might have, so please do use that. And as we go through, I will be putting the questions to the speakers at the end of their presentations. Good. I can see you all joining and using the chat function, so that is great. Good morning to everyone. Okay, so our first speaker this morning is going to be Sophie from Pelsis. Good morning, Sophie.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, to technical difficulties. Hello, everyone. Right. I hope you're all good today. It's nice and sunny here in Knaresborough, although it's very chilly start today, must admit. Right, I will share my slides, I presume. Yep, very good. Right, here we go. Hopefully you can see, I just make that full screen. Hopefully you can see that. So today, as it is autumn, I will be talking about autumn flies. And when I started looking at the topic of autumn flies, of course, cluster flies comes up as like the most one we often think about. That's like the prime example of an autumn fly. But when I asked ChatGPT to say, can you make me an image about autumn flies, I got this interesting picture of just flies on a leaf. So really, when we look at like internet sources, because of course like ChatGPT takes all the information from online, it has no real idea what it's talking about. So it's very like particular still, very industry knowledge, autumn flies, because there's not a lot of information out there about it, which is kind of good as well because we get less misinformation. But really, when you start looking into autumn flies, I had to go back into some of my old textbooks to actually find some information about, for example, the green cluster fly, which is not as well known a type of autumn fly. Okay, so I'm Sophie Thorogood. I work for Pelsis. Pelsis creates lots of different pest management tools. So we have like the Insecticutor range, lots of different types of fly killer, insect-like trap. But we also will sell a variety of different pest control products. And as a technical training manager for Pelsis, I do training in pest control. So if everyone's done some training with me, I hope the training was still good and you still like it. But often I do like safe use of rodenticides, level 2, sometimes level 3 types of training and give like technical information. Okay, so let's get cracking on autumn flies. So when you think about autumn flies, we get this kind of picture where we get huge clusters of flies turning up at once. And it's not just like one or two, we have many, many flies turning up. And it really is, it starts as like a nuisance for people because they don't want them in their home, they don't want them in their loft space. But actually, you could get things like damage to the window frames, you get like the fly spotting, and it's just not very nice to have that in your home. And we call them autumn flies because they enter buildings during autumn, as the name suggests. And that's because in the UK, it gets very cold over the winter. And to escape the cold, flies will overwinter or hibernate slightly inside. And they don't enter like a pure hibernation state, but they kind of enter like this like dormancy, or we call it diapause sometimes, where they're not moving, they're not eating as much. They slow down their whole body. And that allows them to withstand the winter and actually survive and then make it into spring to then be able to mate and continue on their life cycle. And of course, our homes get nice and heated over winter. And so for them, it's like an easier way to survive that cold period. Before houses, they would try and get into like burrows of like different animals, or try to get in like deep into the earth so that they could stay sheltered and not rained upon, don't get too cold over the winter period. Whereas we provide these lovely warm houses that they actually prefer to be in instead. And so, yeah, they withstand this winter period, and then in the springtime, that's when they re-emerge, and usually they mate very quickly, and then we'll start to lay eggs, and we'll get maggots, and we'll continue on that life cycle. Okay. We have them, creating a nuisance, the spotting and staining of materials, because of course flies will regurgitate, they bring up a bit of their food, and you can sometimes see that spotting on windows, on glass. You see these like small spots, kind of like creamy colored, but that could also end up on like furnishings. It's a bit of a pain to clean off sometimes. When I used to keep houseflies in the lab, actually, like you could do a lot of cleaning and it would still remain, and you get sometimes a bit of smell associated with it. Another thing is secondary pests. Some of the cluster flies or the autumn flies don't survive, and so they die. And then you get other insects feeding on them. So often I see carpet beetles, and that's because the larvae, the woolly bears, love to feed on dead insects, and this is a prime source of food for them, as well as feeding on, their natural food sources like wool or cashmere, keratin-based things, but they also eat dead insects, which is why carpet beetles are a massive problem in museums where we get like lots of beautiful insect displays. Okay, so first one up, we have to talk about the cluster fly, the pure one we normally associate, which is Pollenia rudis. Okay, now it looks like a housefly, but it's usually slightly bigger. And then when you look at the body, you have these golden hairs on it, which are very distinguishing. Okay, here's my picture. I've taken one on the glue board. I do have a better picture later on where it's a higher resolution. We have these golden hairs on the thorax, so that's the part between the wings, this top of part of the body. And then the abdomen, lower down, is checkered, we say. So it's got a bit of like a mixed match of pattern. They're around 4 to 8 millimeters long. They're not actually part of the housefly, or Muscidae family. They're more part of like the blue bottle family, the Calliphora. But it's probably the only blue bottle type of fly that doesn't have that shiny abdomen or shiny thorax, that bluish gray, kind of bluish green, shiny abdomen and thorax. But they are actually more closely related to blue bottles than to houseflies. And the key thing about this species is that they are parasites of earthworms. And usually in the UK, it's species, or I'll have a go at this, Allobophora. There you go. I'm not used to saying earthworm species names, much better at insects. And that presents a real issue because we are trained so much to find the source of the pest or the breeding location, especially with flies. If it's a blowfly, where's the source of protein? Is it going to be a dead animal, like a dead rat? Is it going to be a meat processing plant or a butcher's? Those are our sources of protein, and we can help minimize them. But with earthworms, we can't go dig up the soil, and you can get high numbers of earthworm in a very small square meter. And so in terms of actually managing them and reducing that breeding source, we're going to have a real difficulty. And that's why year after year, people might get the same problems because you can't control the breeding source. And the flies typically go back to the same place every year. They must leave behind like some kind of odor or scent, something we don't actually know. It's a bit undiscovered, under research, but we don't know why they turn up to the same place every time, but usually they do. And when they do, we get them in attics, we get them in outhouses. If people convert their lofts into bedrooms as well, that's a prime location where you might get them. Even in office buildings. So I know we had a problem a few years ago, and we probably will again this year, that high up in the building, on a nice warm sunny day, the cluster flies do try to get into the building, and we sometimes see them around the windowsills. Naturally, without the building, we'd have like animal burrows or trees as their preferred source, but we, like I said, have these like lovely warm buildings instead. And the earthworm population can be as many as 420 per square meter. So that's a lot of earthworms, a lot of land and earth we could be building and digging up to actually control the cluster flies, which is why when we're trying to manage them, we just can't focus on the source like we normally do. Okay, so this is like the overview of the life cycle. Like I said, we have that earthworm involved. Eggs are laid by the adults onto the soil. They hatch. And at that point, the maggots or the larvae are very, very small, and they will bury into the earth and search for an earthworm. Once they found one, they go through the pores of the earthworm. They will actually penetrate and live inside, and they will eat it. They're actually a parasite of the earthworm. So they're not very nice in that respect. They go through all their like maggot and larval stages in the earthworm, so they grow inside until they get to the last stage, and they will exit the earthworm, and that's so that they can pupate in the soil. And that's usually because it'll be a little bit drier, you know, they can form that case a lot easier, and that makes it much easier to merge as an adult later, because if you pupated in an earthworm, you can be really, really struggling as an adult fly to get out the earthworm. So they exit in that last larval stage, form the pupa outside the earthworm. And then we get this beautiful fly appearing, of course, with these golden hairs on it. And usually you might see them like on sun-warmed windows, we say. So if you think about where the sun is hitting in a building, it will heat up naturally those areas, so on the windows. And that's where the flies would like to be, because they want to stay warm. And then slowly they will actually like creep into the cracks and crevices of the building, kind of seeking out that warmth. And then they start to enter the building and will overwinter inside. In the summer, we've got development as 27 to 39 days. So it's only in winter that they come into the properties, of course. During the summer, they will actually have a couple of generations out in the wild. It's only over winter that they start to come in. And so it takes them only around 30 days to go from egg to adult when it's a nice summery day. Okay. So that is our main one we like to talk about, the Pollenia rudis, the cluster fly. But there are some other cluster flies you might come across at this time of year. And that includes the yellow cluster fly. We have this one, which is a lot smaller. We're only like around 4 millimeters big, and it's kind of yellowish color. And you've got these black markings on the thorax and abdomen. Okay, again, like you get them in a high number. You won't just get like one or two, you get a few turning up on a glue board or inside a property. The larvae, when they're fully grown, only grow up to 2.5 millimeters. So again, very small, we're talking about, not very large. If we don't have any buildings or property, they much prefer to live in a rough, grassy place, okay? So they are wild as well. They have this like wildlife cycle. And if you have a building probably near more like this like kind of wild area where we've got grasses, that you're more likely to come across this species. At one point, we estimated we found 12 to 14 million in one building, which is a huge number. I don't know who counted that or how they got to that estimate. I presume, you know, they really extrapolated. They counted a small section and just multiplied up. But they, like I said, they cluster in huge numbers, really, really big. And of course, when you normally see them on a glue board, it'd be a lot harder to see than this perfect picture I've got where it's got nice high resolution. But try and think about like that yellow and black marking, get your hand lens out to have a nice, better look. And if you're not sure, send pictures. We've got some great phones now with some great camera quality. You can even get little lenses to go on the back of your phones. But yeah, you can send them a picture to maybe someone else in your company, or there's lots of different companies that will help you out. So I know BPCA will, Pelsis will, there'll be loads of other companies that will help to identify the pest for you. Or in the MBTA, I've got to talk about them as well. So that's the yellow cluster fly. Then we've got, again, the life cycle. So we have the eggs, again, really associated with grasslands. The eggs are deposited on the soil at the base of grasses. And this is key because the larvae, instead of liking earthworms this time, they feed on a type of aphid. And so we're getting this like kind of like natural wild life cycle where it's really hard to remove the source of them, the breeding source, because we've got this other organism involved that is helping to populate them. Okay. The aphid is usually called a lettuce aphid, but it will actually feed on lots of different types of plants. But then the root system of the grasses feeding on the lettuce, for example, and that's where the larvae will also feed on the aphids. Again, after they've fed on the aphids, they then will pupate in the soil, and that helps them. And then they will sometimes overwinter in the soil as well. They don't have to necessarily overwinter in a house. Like naturally they would do that. But again, because we've started to build these houses that are like, and buildings which are much warmer, they end up coming inside. So some of the flies are like swept upwards, under windows, under the eaves of roofs, and then they enter the building that way. Instead of like being out in the wild. But yeah, in the summer, we've got at least 2 generations happening, and that's to help progress them. They don't just like go from eggs in the springtime to larva to pupa to adult to enter back in the building. They will have their own little cycle going on in the summer to help build up the population. Okay, so that's the yellow cluster fly, very small, like I said, 4 millimeters, and you've got those 3 like dark stripes on the thorax, and it's generally like a yellowish color. Okay, then we have a green cluster fly. Now I had to research this one a bit better myself because I don't come across this one very often, and it looks quite like a normal green fly, right? A normal green blowfly. But this is one that will turn up in high numbers, and it will, again, associated with coming indoors into buildings over winter. Okay, so be aware if you suddenly find like a lot of green bottles, you can't find a source of meat or protein, no dead animal, try and like have a rethink, because it could be the green cluster fly instead, sometimes called a dern fly. Okay, now again, because they look like a green blowfly, they've got that greenish tinge, we've got like that metallic sheen on the thorax. But usually you can just about see these 2 dark stripes going down the thorax. They're not very clear, but you can just about see it in that picture, these kind of 2 dark stripes going down the thorax. You can also look at the wings. And flies, we often look at the wing veins. And that's because actually it's much easier to identify flies using the wing veins. For example, the classic example is it a common housefly or a lesser housefly? And you can look at the wings and it helps you tell the difference very easily. For a green cluster fly, you have the 4th wing vein bending gently forwards, okay? So for me, like I need to have examples. I need to have a normal Lucilia, a normal green bottle to compare against, because even if you look into books, it's so much easier if you've got the example of the insect next to it, because then you can actually see the anatomical differences much closer. So many times I've been there with like a biscuit beetle, and like I need to have the biscuit beetle and the cigarette beetle as the representation next to the one I'm trying to identify, because it just helps so much better compared to a book. So yeah, if you come across samples, build up your own little collection, I'd say. Now, the green cluster fly doesn't often enter like a normal domestic house. Usually we associate them more with like a barn, and that's because they're often around livestock. A lot of them will use animal dung or cow pats to help feed the larva. And so when you come across these, they're more associated with agriculture because that is where they've been breeding. And so when they're clustering inside a barn. But it's useful to know because you do get more like this building of like on agricultural land. You're getting like less and less distinction between homes and farmland. That's what's happening with urbanization. We're getting more and more kind of close relationships between wildlife and humans. Okay, so here is the life cycle again. We've got eggs laid in batches, usually around 25 to 30 eggs per female, and she'll lay a few of those over her lifetime, but she'll do that in a batch, and usually she'll try and find like some kind of animal dung to lay it in, because that gives her children the best survival rate. As a maggot or a larva, we've got around 3 to 4 weeks, or 21 to 28 days, and they'll be eating the animal dung. Very nice, I know. And that gives them a lot of food source. Then again, like exit to pupate somewhere else. And that's also to help so that they don't get eaten by other maggots. You might get a little bit of larval competition, and so they escape. They will pupate somewhere else where it's a lot safer. And then they will merge into this beautiful green fly with those 2 stripes down the thorax and this 4th wing vein that's slightly bent forwards. Okay. Most of the time they're active as an adult fly between May and November. And again, they'll go through life cycles in the wild. And then when we get to like the colder November period, then they'll start to seek out like these warmer spots away from like wind and rain. And that's why they end up in something like a barn. Okay. This one I don't come across too often, but it's really good to know about, because, you know, if you keep getting green bottle complaints and you're near where we might have like animals being kept, could just be like horses, but like some other larger animal, and you can't find any sort of like meat, protein, you could be like, how would I get rid of them? And it could actually just be you're dealing with a cluster fly instead of a normal blowfly. Okay. And then my last one is the face fly, or what we sometimes call the autumn fly. It's got a couple of names. Typically, we see it as Musca autumnalis, which is literally translated to autumn fly. But it's also associated with like being around faces. Like that's why it gets the name as face fly. It's been found like feeding on like residues, like teary residues, or around cattle, like bothering them around the face. Okay. It does look like I'm just showing you a housefly here. They look really, really similar to a housefly. We've got the same sort of size. We've got 4 to 6 millimeters, but the fact that they're aggregating together helps give like a big clue. If you suddenly have like a huge number of houseflies, you go, what the hell's going on? Could be the autumn fly. We've got things like buildings, sheds, animal burrows, lots of different areas, depending on where they might be. Again, I'd say it might be more associated with cattle or agriculture, because they're known to be a big pest around cattle, like even like leading to like the cattle being like not as well, not as healthy. So sometimes you see like a drop in milk yield. You have like a lot of these face flies or autumn flies around the cattle. They don't do so well. They get basically really annoyed, and they spend a lot of time like evading the flies and not as much time eating the grass, so you get less milk being produced. Anyway, so when you look at the eyes, this can help you to tell the difference between what's a normal housefly and what is this face or autumn fly. And that's because the eyes are basically much more closer together. And in the males, it kind of almost looks like one continuous structure. They don't have the space in between. Usually female flies have the eyes are slightly further apart than the males, but with the autumn fly, the male eyes are like almost like one piece. So they don't have a gap in between sometimes. Generally, they're like more rounded as well compared to a housefly, and you might get more of like an orange abdomen. So the bottom part of the fly might be more orangey than compared to like a yellowy color we associate with a normal housefly. Okay. Those are like some things to look out for. Again, like if they're clustering in large numbers, that's a bit of a clue. If it's in a barn or a loft space, an attic, you go, "Ooh, why would the flies be here?" Usually it's actually a cluster fly or a face fly that's turning up. Okay. And again, I'll show you the life cycle. So the eggs, again, are laid singly or in batches. They have the opportunity to do either this time. The hatching occurs within 24 hours, so very quickly. And usually we're using like manure, again, or the cattle dung as a source of food for the larva. And it can take only 5 days for them to go through their larval stages, so to go from egg to pupa. And that's at a relatively low temperature, 20 degrees Celsius. Usually to get that speed of life cycle, you need it at least 5 degrees warmer, but this one does very well in the UK at surviving at these kind of lower temperatures. Again, the larva likes, when it is ready to pupate, it will leave the animal manure and then seek out like soil, some kind of drier soil to pupate in. And that will probably pupate in around 7 to 10 days. And then after that, they will emerge into this beautiful fly, okay? The adults, really in the summer, we estimate they live around 10 days, so not very long. They got to get busy, mating and laying more eggs to make sure the next generation survives. But if they emerge when it's maybe this time of year, maybe in October, they will start to seek out these like warmer spots, and then they will actually survive the winter by overwintering and lasting those few months indoors. Okay. So those are the main cluster flies. If anyone has found another one, please do let me know, because those are the main ones I have found on literature or what I've come across in the field. I say, yeah, normally when you talk about cluster flies, the Pollenia rudis, the main cluster fly, is the one we always seem to come across. And then I would say autumn flies or the face flies, like the next most common I come across. And like I've been saying the whole way through, management can be tricky or can be difficult, okay? We focus so much on thinking like, what does the pest survive on? Where can I remove food? Where can I remove like access to harborage? How can I implement better sanitation? But with the cluster flies and, the other species associated it's really hard to remove where they're breeding. I mean, if you're dealing with the autumn fly and it's got cow manure, it's gonna take a lot of cleaning and sanitation, and it's just not really actually feasible. And so management, instead, we can focus on things like proofing. Okay, how can we stop them coming in? And it's usually any small crack or crevice is what they like to enter through. So here's some examples of like a window not sealing properly. And it could be only a small gap, but that does allow the flies to come in. If we think about a mouse can enter a gap more than 5 millimeters big, house flies are a lot smaller. Sorry, flies are a lot smaller, and they can squeeze through much smaller gaps. Okay. Again, they don't have bones as well, so it allows them to squeeze through a lot smaller gaps. So try and make sure that everything's sealed and it's got a good seal like around the window. And on the outside of the building, can you see any cracks and crevices that you could also seal? So I've just put one kind of a sealant up there, but anything that's appropriate for the wet weather and the surface you're applying it to. But any small gaps, we want to get rid of them as soon as possible, usually over the summer, or around this time before we start to get this drop in temperature and the flies are trying to enter the buildings. Okay. I know that's not always possible, because especially when you're dealing with a barn, you've got lots of gaps. But as a first point of call, like proofing is like the thing we always recommend, whether it's rodent management, insect management, proofing comes first. How do we stop the pest coming into the building, stopping their ingress? Okay. After proofing, we have things like that are non-chemical management. So here I've got examples of vacuuming and sweeping. I know that's not really what we think of like as professional pest control sometimes, but actually you just want to physically remove as many of them as possible. And like I said, you can get huge numbers, and instead of spraying an insecticide, it might just be useful to go around and hoover them up, a huge quantity of them first, and then apply insecticide afterwards, because you're going to have a much better effect, a much more suitable long-term approach. And you've got to think again about that integrated pest management part. Integrated pest management is not about removing the pesticides or removing the sprays. It's about making them work the best. And whatever other methods can we combine that insecticide with to get the best approach? And actually, if you remove a lot of the insects first through physical removal like vacuuming, your insecticide is more likely to work on the insects, because you're going to get the residual lasting in the environment. You can get only less numbers going over the spray, and then actually going to get a better effect overall. Okay. Now that can be quite time consuming to vacuum a lot of the time. So we do have other things out there. So for example, diatomaceous earth might be effective if you can get it into cracks and crevices. Depends on the site and situation you're working with. Because it has to stay dry and you don't want to get it damp or clumped. So it might not be suitable for some areas, but you might be able to put down diatomaceous earth to help reduce the numbers. Another thing is that we have lots of sticky traps. So on the bottom of the page, you can see this like large glue board. That is, I think, called a cattle sheet, and that's been catching a lot of autumn flies. And that works really, really well. Just to catch flies, reduce their numbers. You don't even have to have a power supply with them. They work really, really well, just like catching the flies because of the colors and the pattern in the glue board. It kind of looks 3D to a fly, so they think it's an object to land on rather than a flat surface, and then they get caught. And so that's a simple way of just like reducing numbers. Think about non-powered sticky traps. Okay. Of course, you do have insect light traps available. If you're dealing with things like cluster fly, though, your glue board's going to get full quite quickly with a normal fly killer. And so it's much better to go for something like this cluster fly insect light trap. And you get this massive catch tray. So if I show it next to my head, it shows it how big it is. And then inside, you can see, you can catch a lot of flies inside. And so it's very good if you want to have like this device in there that's always catching the flies over time, but you don't have to go back and clean it out every couple of days because it's full. Okay. I don't recommend putting these in anywhere you don't have regular access to. So somewhere like a loft, it's very dry. If we put anything with a power source in it, it's not recommended because, we're not checking it and there's a risk of fire. I would say they're fine if you've got like converted lofts. So people use them as bedrooms instead or offices that are high up, you could use something like that instead. But if it's a normal loft, I wouldn't recommend putting them in there just in case, because you've got the insulation, you've got a bit of a fire risk. But where you get high numbers of them, they do work phenomenally well to just lower them and constantly catch the flies. Okay. And then we also have some chemical management. So I recommend things like smoke. That would be really useful just to knock down the numbers very quickly. You can like release one into the space, especially if it's a smaller space like an attic. That will work well in. I wouldn't recommend it for a barn where it's a lot bigger, of course. And that works very well, just like knocking down the adult flies. You might not get all of them though, because you'll have like small cracks and crevices. And the smoke tries really well, but it can't actually penetrate inside walls like something like a gas like aluminium phosphide. It just fills the space, but it won't really penetrate inside the building. So it's very used to like smaller spaces. You can get bigger ones, but like try not to use it in anywhere too big, like a barn, like I said. The same example, you could kind of use ultra low volume. So there's lots of different things available. Perma CS works quite well to like knock down again the adult flies. And then you can also use it as a spray to help leave like the residual behind. So when the next flies walk over it, they will get the insecticide and die. So something like that worked quite well if you can't go back regularly to vacuum or something like that, you can kill the flies and then leave a residual insecticide. So you've got it good control for a good month or 6 weeks, and then you might have to reapply at the end of that to knock down the next bunch of flies. We also have aerosols. Again, you can get ones that are like one shots that you just leave in there. Once you've pulled it, they will empty the canister and then fill the space. It depends how big the cluster of flies is. Usually I'm thinking about large ones, but you don't have to use a one shot. You also have different aerosols which you can just spray to the flies and that will knock them down. You can also use a dust into cracks and crevices. I I really like diatomaceous earth, but if you want a quick action, you might want to use an insecticide dust instead. Something like Volcud, which is really good for like inside brickwork. Okay, so depends on the site, what you can have for access. If you're going back regularly, or if the space is being used, a smoke might be better to quickly kill off all the flies, and then people can re-enter after a certain period. You could, of course, use maybe a pyrethrum based spray, which has a much quicker access period, quite safe to use around people if they're spending a lot of time in space. But think about what's accessible, how people use in space, think about the infestation as well, about how to best tackle it. Okay. Oh, and this is a picture of inside my cluster fly tray, just to show you a small percentage of the flies we've caught in our cluster fly killer. Okay. I think that's me done. Only 5 minutes early, so that's worked pretty well, I think. Got some questions.
Good timing, Sophie. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions actually. I used to really enjoy cluster flies because it's quite an interesting one to talk to the customer about. It's slightly different and the parasitic aspect of it.
Yeah,
It's interesting. It gives them something
yeah.
to discuss. Obviously, with a lot of other flies, we can control either by removing the source of the infestation or using things like larvicides. Is there anything like nematodes that would be useful for cluster flies as an
Yeah,
option?
so nematodes can be used like they're tiny little worms that will like kind of seek and destroy, I say, they will find the maggots in the ground and find the earthworms and kill them. I find so nematodes are very much dependent on temperature, moisture, and they can be a little bit hard to apply. And you'd have to get the timing quite right. Usually when people have cluster flies, they call you and they've already got them in the building. Really, you need to be applying the nematodes a couple of months in advance to stop them actually breeding in the soil. And so if you have the same customer that has the problem every year, you might go, well, next year, call me or I will phone you at this type of time and we'll organize this treatment to see if we can reduce the numbers in the area for next winter. But you have to be really like proactive with it. You can't just like use it as like an afterthought, I'd say. But they're really interesting nematodes. They use them a lot in lettuce farming as well because you get like soil really wet and you have like things like fungus gnats. So they're good at seeking and destroying them there. Yeah, good fun.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like I say, it's difficult to manage the sort of early stages of the life cycle. And
Yeah.
then normally, like you say, don't have them in the property until they've got them in the property and they've got a problem. I
Yeah.
remember the first time I only came across, or the only time I ever came across green cluster fly, I had a call out for a house, and the lady was actually in labour as I turned up. And I turned up and was like, "You've got green bottles everywhere," in this sort of panic. I was early in my career, so I didn't I knew they were there, but not something I'd come across. So I was like,
Yeah.
I've got to sort this out. So I was looking for something like, a source of the infestation for green bottles. Couldn't find anything, scratching my head on this. And we ended up having to take the fireplace out, and the chimney was actually full
Wow.
of green cluster fly.
Yeah.
And that was like geez, got to do something here. And I think they actually moved the tenants out of the property, and because she was in labour as I turned up at the door, which was
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's the best option, just to
yeah.
to leave at that point.
Give them to it for a few weeks, let them settle down. And then because they were in the fireplace, I think they just sealed up it was like an electric fireplace. So they didn't need the chimney.
Yeah.
So I think they just sealed that up in the next year to stop them coming back. So that was
I wonder if they still did they seal it at the top?
I think so, yeah, because
Yeah.
it was
Okay.
electric. I don't think they needed any of the flue or anything like that. So if I remember right, it was probably 10 or 15 years ago, but I think they just sealed the top of
Yeah.
it just to try and stop them getting in. It was quite a
Yeah.
newish property. It wasn't like a really old, there wasn't air bricks and things everywhere. So
No.
it was quite easy for
They,
them.
they will find a way. Like you'd
Yeah,
think, how
100%.
would they get all the way in the top of the chimney and then work their way down? But they will. And it's quite amazing, like the sheer tenacity of these flies. Like to just be like, no, I will stay here, and this is the best place for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're quite interesting.
And they had them in large numbers and in the property. And I was just trying to work out like where are all these flies coming from? Like it doesn't really make sense to have this many anyway. But yeah, there was a big cluster of them that was in the chimney, and like you say, the fireplace was sealed in. It was quite newly decorated and well fitting. but they managed to find their way in, and they were
Yeah.
in most rooms in the property. Does the earthworm survive?
Oh, I that's a really good question. I didn't look into that because I like this. I like the insects. I don't like the things
Yeah,
about the
no.
legs. I would say it probably affects their fitness. I think they could survive, but I don't quote me on that. If someone knows, please let me know because I'd always like to learn. But I feel like
Yeah.
earthworms, I remember like you could do quite a lot of damage to earthworms and they survive. So I would imagine they do survive at cluster flies as well.
Yeah, I remember years ago fishing with earthworms, and you'd cut them up, and they'd just carry on wriggling around.
Well,
Um,
that was my thinking. I remember cutting
yeah,
them as a child and being like, well, they're surviving. So that's why I think they would survive a cluster fly larva living inside them. Because it's also one maggot per earthworm. It's not like 5 or 6 within them. So I think they would survive that.
yeah. Um, LED tubes. There's a question here about the one of the photos showed was an old insecticutor with a fluorescent bulb, or was it an LED tube one? It says, just curious because regs ban the use of the latter tubes in 2020, or are going to ban them in 2027, should I say?
Yeah, so the unit I showed you is like one specific for cluster flies. Now we don't have an LED version of it, but you can now buy lamps that are LEDs to replace into your old fluorescent units. So they're called retrofit lamps. Our one we sell is called OptiCatch, but they're really simple that you take the old fluorescent lamps out, and then instead you put in LED versions of them. You just have to make sure that when you're doing that, you replace the starter and you have to put like a dummy starter in because, of course, LEDs don't need a starter. And so you just be mindful when you're converting old fluorescent units to the LED lamps that you also buy the dummy starters at the same time to make sure the unit works. Otherwise, they kind of flicker on and off.
Yeah,
It's trying to like power it the same way and it doesn't work. Yeah.
perfect. Is Super Smoke available from Pelsis Nordic?
Oh, I would imagine so. It should be. I would hope so. Please do check with our Nordic Pelsis team, and I'm sure they will help you out to get it to you.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Before
Oh.
treatments, someone recommends carrying out a survey, obviously looking for things like bats when using fly units in void spaces.
Yeah, definitely look for also water tanks as well. You know, anything that could be, I mean, we don't get water tanks that often, but in the older properties, definitely look for them. Check for your bats. Also, like check for wasp nests just in case like anything survive. You don't want to be like stung accidentally when you're doing it. Is always good. And see, think about how sealed it is because and proofing is always first, but if you're like you've got lots of gaps, think about how the insecticide is going to move and it might actually get out of the property. So that's a nice safety feature. Like just try and think about the whole space. I also see, thank you, Stephen and James. Thank you for telling me. Okay, so they do kill the earthworms. I didn't know that. Thank you for letting me
Oh,
know that.
good.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, yeah, I with the fly units in void space, it's that risk assessment piece, and it's checking all these things and carrying out that risk assessment. I think the only place I ever had one was in a like void space in a hospital where they had quite a big problem of cluster flies quite high up in a hospital building, and they were just in this particular void space, but it was just like a riser cupboard that you could get into, and we had one in there, but I can't think of anywhere else where I put an EFK unit over the years.
Yeah.
Is
I've had one where the cluster flies were in like a hallway. Like strangely, I don't know why a hallway, but it was nice and warm. And so actually the fly kind of worked quite well there because you could spray, but then they would keep coming back. So it was like a nice thing to just constantly have in the environment to like catch them as they entered. So yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
worked well.
remember I used to live in a bit of a rural property, and I'd got a fly unit, an old one that came off somewhere, and I put it up in my kitchen just to see, what wonder if flies are getting in here. And funny enough, one autumn there was quite a lot of cluster flies in that, which was interesting. Is it the pheromone that brings them back to the same property each year?
Well, I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know, we don't seem to have knowledge about this. I think it's a bit of an
No.
overlooked topic, but I think there must be something because, of course, flies do have pheromones. They have like sex pheromones that will, or and aggregating pheromones. So I think there must be something that's bringing them back to the same place every year. and not just by chance, because a lot of the time, you know, like they will go to certain places because it's nice and warm, but usually the same place has the problem every
Yeah.
year. And I think there must be something that's left behind, some kind of pheromone that drives them back there.
Yeah, I had one site that I used to go to every winter, and we had to manage the situation because they had cluster flies, but they also had a honeybee's nest in the roof space. So we had to like manage them too. Obviously couldn't really do anything because of the both things were there, and they wanted to leave the bees alone because they were in, you know, rural property, and it wasn't affecting anyone. So we went and just did a survey just to make sure that that was still the case, everything was still fine, it wasn't causing any damage to the property and things like that. But yeah, they went to that property every year. You know, you could set your clock by them almost by the week, at the turn up.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's amazing. How do they know? But yeah, there
And
must there must be a
got to be
pheromone.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
whether it's pheromone, whether it's, you know, they're using the same place every year and it becomes a, you know, like a habitual thing that they know that that place is safe and secure and warm and
Yeah.
it's got everything they need. But yeah, I mean, like I say,
It would
there's
be a great research project. I don't if
yeah,
like if we ever had any funding for like universities, I think that would be a really useful one just because
yeah,
like I said like, throughout this, you can't get rid of the source of them. And actually that's the main problem in pest control. Like we need to find an alternative, and maybe it is we need to like get rid of the scent. Yeah.
yeah. Yes, like I think someone just mentioned, like fecal droppings and things like that. They do leave something there that could attract them again. So, yeah, there's some obviously research to be done into that. Hopefully,
Yeah.
good. Thank you, Sophie.
No problem. Well, thank you for having me. Everyone have a nice day. I'll talk
And
to you
you.
later.
Thanks. See you soon.